program, and I said, "Hey, Charlie, where are you? We found him!" Yay! All right, so I don't know if it would be safe to say we're saving the best for last. You're last. Let's put it that way. Anyways, for the purpose of the recording, I'm Tom LeClaire, the Clayton historian, and this is the final hashing over history for the 2022 sesquicentennial year. Actually, there was 12 planned. He couldn't make it last week, so I filled in. So now we have 13 programs, and they're all going to be Yeller, that famous 13. But again, this is a partnership program with the Thousand Islands Museum, Clayton Historian's Office, the Sesquicentennial Committee, and the Clayton Opera House. And we've been thrilled to bring you these programs. The History at Noon programs are going to continue. They happen on the second Wednesday of every month, right through December. I mentioned it earlier to some of you, but we got Clay Ferguson is going to be here on April 13th talking about the fishing guides, and he's bringing in a lot of show and tell type items. But today you get to hear, we got again the wonderful speaker. We've heard from Charlie before at a Hashing Over History. Wonderful speaker. He's a storyteller in his own right, and I gave him the opportunity to come on back. I wanted him to come on back because he's got more stories to tell. And I got with him ahead of time and said, there's certain stories you might not want to share because this video is going to be shared all over the world. So he understands. But with that, Charlie, the program is yours.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you very much. Okay, I got to dispel two myths that circulate frequently around this village. One, they tell you have to have great-grandparents buried in the cemetery if you're a native. Well, my lineage is such that I only have grandparents because the men in my family decided to wait until their 30s to have kids. So we skipped generations. But that's one. Two, Jim Stage was my uncle, not my dad. A lot of people confuse that. My father's name was Chuck, hence Charlie. Okay, that's the two myths I'll get rid of right away. Now, I've tried to think of what I'm going to say after viewing or being here for all of the histories. And everything's been said. So I'm going to tell you a story about a kid growing up in this village. I was about 5 years old when I started remembering things, and I'll take you through to the graduation of my senior year if I have enough time. The railroad, that was the first thing I saw this year, was when Larry Gerard gave a talk about the railroad coming into Clayton and told some of the experiences. Well, I have a personal connection because my grandfather, Cleve Stage, he worked on that railroad. He started out as a baggage man at the turn of the century, worked his way up to conductor, finally retired in 1954, I believe it was, but passed away in 1956, so I didn't get to know him well enough. Now, my grandfather lived in different houses. He rented first. They actually started out in Watertown. His father's buried in the cemetery in Watertown, my great-grandfather. They moved into Clayton in, I think it was 1903 or 1904 is when he moved to Clayton. And living in various places around the community, he finally ended up here on Webb Street, corner of Webb and Mary, in the white house that you see up there. I did remember at one time the name of the people that owned it. He rented from them. And across the way, his oldest son, Jim, moved in, my Uncle Jim. So that was Jimmy Stage on that side, my father and mother, my grandfather, Cleve, and his wife, Elizabeth, lived in the house the White House on the corner. The reason my parents stayed with them is my grandfather's mother, or wife, was dying. So they stayed there to take care of her. My father moved into his first house on Franklin Street, 602 Franklin Street, in 1952, 1 year after I was born. So my first year of residence was that house sitting on the corner. My second year of residence in the house that I've owned ever since because it was willed to me by my mother. has been 602 Franklin Street, Clayton. We are the second longest living family on that street. And there is nobody left but the Stage family and the Mellons. Ann Mellon's house, they moved there in 1946. So they've got us by 6 years. But my son currently lives in my mom and dad's house. On the other side of my family, I'm a descendant of the Ruffin Cornairs. Now, they were not native to Clayton, they were native of Rosier and Cape Vincent. There's going to be a really cool connection here that I'd love to be able to match up. I don't know if Tom can do it, but I'm going to say it today. They lived in Rosier. My grandfather's name was Clarence. He was a pilot on the lake. He went from sailing ships to steam, as in Jimmy Buffett's song says. But he piloted ships on Lake Ontario during the season. And then when it froze over, he was a caretaker for houses on Fox and Grinnell out on the lake. He used to walk across the ice to take care of the places. So my grandmother, Mamie, we called her, Mary Cornair, she lived 103, God rest her soul. She was quite a bit of an enlightenment to me in my history. She lived with us when her husband died. I didn't know my grandfather Clarence. He passed away the year my sister was born. So I didn't get to know him, but she related a lot of stories of the railroad first coming in to Cape Vincent. The pilot boat was in Cape Vincent. My grandfather Cleve was on the railroad, and they met each other before my family even got married into that family, which I thought was awesome. So they knew. We connected the lake right straight through to Clayton. Now, the railroad. Oh my gosh. Living over on Franklin Street, we had a railroad going by our house. Well, I'm a dreamer, a schemer, and I'm influenced by a lot of things. And if you remember the R Gang comedies, the Cats and Jammer Kids, Daniel Boone was a man, a big man. You remember Westerns, science fiction, you name it. I was influenced by authors like Isaac Asimov, Ray Bradbury, Robert Heinlein, Louis L'Amour, Westerns. Great movies at Bertrand's Theater because Bertrand's was owned by part of my family too. My aunt Margaret Stage married Carl Bertrand, and of course that got us into the whole Bertrand family. Movies were not free because Owen was cheap. Actually, I say that to get a laugh, but we used to go to the movies quite a bit, our families. And which brings me back to an event on the railroad. One night coming back from a movie was the first derailment at the end of Mary Street, right by the turntable. An engine went off the road, as they said. And Uncle Jim was a police officer then, so he got called out of the theater before we did. But we got to come walking across town and got to see an engine sitting on the side of the road, which is unusual if you think an engine's supposed to be on a railroad track. Now, it took a couple days, but they got a crane and brought it into town and lifted that crane, or the crane lifted that train back onto the track. No other damage, away she went. But I thought that was pretty cool because the crane had to navigate the streets of Clayton. They had to bring it in from Watertown. There was nothing down here big enough. And that's what took the 2 days because they had to make all the arrangements. I guess they had to clear wires and everything like that. And the other part of the railroad tracks. When I was a kid, about 5 years old, I remember my grandfather sitting on his knee, telling me stories. I don't remember the stories. As they say, I had to find them out later. But he impressed upon me the necessity of railroads and the necessity of coal at that time, which we're all trying to get rid of. Well, we had a coal furnace in our cellar. So, listening to my grandfather, I thought I'd help get rid of the coal. I put 2 5-gallon pails in the back of my wagon, and I'd walk down the railroad bed and pick up coal. Now, I knew the difference between anthracite and bituminous. Because the anthracite burned longer, it was harder. Now, I got taught that by my grandfather. The bituminous, the soft coal, that was mostly going into the ships because they didn't care if they had a large cloud of smoke, they knew where they were. So I went down and picked up blocks of anthracite coal, filled my 2 5-gallon pails. I'd bring them back to the house. I'd take them, put them down in the cellar. Couldn't pick up a 5-gallon pail. The pail was bigger than me, heavier than me. But I'd get down and shovel coal in the furnace and pretend I was on a ship stoking boilers. So then I would connect myself to what my grandfather on the other side of the family, being a pilot, he never had to do that with the ships. But, you know, he brought them across the lake before they got to the seaway. And you probably remember hand carts. Well, one night, just after dinner, and it was light out, a friend of mine and I'm not going to mention names, a friend of mine and I found a hand cart that wasn't locked up. So we decided we'd pull a little Argane comedy, or maybe it was a Three Stooges, I don't know what, and we'd take off on this hand cart. Well, the hand cart is a bear to move. And it took all the weight of a 10-year-old to jump on that thing and get it to go. And then the 10-year-old on the other side jumping on it and getting it to go. So we couldn't get it going fast enough, so we both got on the same side and did a jump and lift, a jump and lift. Well, that thing started rolling, and if you don't hit the brake, it doesn't stop. Now, we went clear out past Joe Masters, but we didn't quite make it to the trestle because we figured when we got that far with the hand cart, you know, we got to get back, and we aren't quite sure, you know, what time we're going to get back. Well, the hand cart doesn't go uphill very well. And there's some uphill, believe it or not, between here and the trestle. And it was well after dark when we finally got home, totally exhausted, and I got reamed out for, I think it was a school night. And I kind of, there we go, big ship. And we never did manage to get to the hand cart back to its yard. There was a siding at Winggrass. We pulled it into the siding, figuring, we knew there wasn't any train traffic at night, but we didn't know if the train in the daytime was going to spot it in time. So the hand cart set in the Winggrass siding. We never did find out what happened to it, but it was gone. And from then on in, all the hand carts were locked again. So that was a toughie. That was real tough. But we made an adventure out of the railroad. The kids in the neighborhood, we loved hiking. And we'd all go up to the sand pit, to the trestle. As a matter of fact, I walked there yesterday to get back into some memories. I'm not really sure I like what they've done. It's good for a lot of people, but I liked crossing the railroad ties. You know, I was doing it last year before they started the new construction. I just see too many people going up there now, I guess. But we'd go up to the trestle, and we'd make a day of it up there, sometimes an overnight, sometimes build campfires. And we made, and again, I'm not going to capitalize on it, but I wish I had, I think, a first zip line in the area. We strung a rope from the trestle, and Dad was a little upset because it was one of those old manila ropes that went to a set of chain falls that was in our barn that he'd gotten from the railroad. The barn, by the way, on my dad's property was also part of the railroad. They had moved it when the railroad was shutting down, and they moved that barn over to my dad's property. And we had that manila line where I disassembled this chain fall, took that with me, and another bunch of line, and we tied it all up from the trestle across the creek to a tree and swooped another rope over the top of it, tied knots in the bottom of the rope so our hands wouldn't slip out, and just tucked our legs up and down we went. It wasn't the fastest thing in the world, but it wasn't bad. But we went across, and sometimes the thing just kind of got that little loop at the bottom of the creek where you couldn't make it across, and unfortunately you had to drop in the creek, which wasn't bad. If it was a warm day, you had a good time dumping in the creek. The trestle, the first trestle at right there where the dentist used to be there, right there over 12, was probably, I don't know what, I can't remember the year there, but it was one of the first, wasn't a fatal accident, but it was one of the first really nasty accidents that I recall, because a good friend of mine I used to wrestle in school with, he struck that coming back from Alex Bay one time, and we had just walked across it and ran back up when we heard the commotion. Well, not exactly that. We got all the way down to Windgrass when we heard the sirens head up there. We heard the thing hit, but we weren't sure what it was. And when we got back up there, we saw them taking this individual out of the car, and literally at a piece of glass, you can see the glass coming right out of his forehead. For kids, that was pretty shocking. But you know, some of the memories, you got to tell all the memories if you're going to. The railroad also provided us with a distinction. I mean, we had the Goose Bay side of town, had the railroad, had the boathouses. Had the boathouses down just off the end of Mary Street. There was, let's see, I think there was Barlow, Kellogg, Turcotte, Rice, and one other, if I remember. And that's where I learned to swim, was off those boathouses. You guys had the beach, Pink Eye Beach, on the French Creek side.
Pink Eye.
Pink Eye, yeah. They had shut it down for Infantigo, I guess it was. They ended up shutting it down for. But Pink Eye Beach, everybody that went swimming there came out with pink eyes. So we hung out at the boathouses down here across the railroad tracks. So we spent time being mostly across the railroad tracks. My father, in fact, taught me how to swim there by setting me off the side of Barlow's dock at 5 years old and said, okay, swim. But I did. So I ended up being a natural, I think, that way, because from there, swimming just became everything you ever wanted to do in the village. Had a great neighborhood. I started writing a list of names, and then I said to myself, I'm not going to give any names because I could cause a lot of problems. But what I do is I'll look at the names, and that'll remind me of an event. So I open that up right now and see what it reminds me of. The swamp down at the end of the street. There was a house right now just beyond the fence where the field is. There was a house there that was owned by a great family that since got torn down. But that family were very good friends of mine, and we used to go down to the creek. We called it the creek in that swamp. It was the funniest color. It was orange and yellow and sometimes red. So there was a lot of stuff going through that creek because it was a dump. The other side of the road would be the other side of Webb Street would be the skate rink eventually. But we used to get frogs out of that creek and eat frog legs. Now, I'm still here today, but I wonder about that creek and that swamp. On the other side of the railroad tracks was Windgrass, and you could see the pipe with the yellow and orange and red water coming out into the bay there. So, and for whatever reason, I would never catch bullheads in that bay and eat them. I was always afraid, but I ate frog legs out of that creek. Now, I don't know, there's some detachment there. Turtles, oh my gosh, I've heard people talk about turtles. I used to get turtles down there. Now, my older sister doesn't recall it. My younger sister does, and there's a member of this audience that even remembers. But I used to go get turtles because I love getting snapping turtles. I used to get any kind of turtle. I used to get any kind of snake. I'd bring them home. They weren't welcomed at home, but I brought them home anyhow. But I used to try to train snapping turtles. I put them on a leash. And I was reminded of that.
How'd you get the collar on them?
If you got a turtle to stick its neck out far enough, and you had the rope loose and ready, he'd come right out with that neck. And sometimes what I would do is I'd set that loop right around, and sometimes when his head would come out, and if I jerked it right, I'd get that rope to come right up, and he couldn't pull his head back inside the shell anymore. Now,
Did you count your fingers when you're done?
To get him to walk was another thing. You had to train a turtle to walk. That was pretty interesting because the snapping turtle by nature is very aggressive anyhow. So if you led him with something, he'd literally come after it. He would. He'd dart right after it. And if he had that thing on his collar, that made him do it more so. He was angry. He couldn't get his head back in. He couldn't shelter, so he'd strike out. When he'd strike out, he'd move. And I'd walk a turtle. I took him up to my yard, and of course he wasn't, I couldn't pick him up. That's the reason I walked him. He was that big. But I took him up to my yard, and my younger sister remembers it. My older sister now says she must have been away because she doesn't remember it. But we had the turtle in the yard for a day or so, and then finally I thought he was going to die, and I was able to get the line cut. And I think, I say this because I never really, I think he got, I mean, I know he got away, he left the yard, but I think he got out of the noose. I hope he did. You know, I'd hate to think that poor turtle died. But water snakes. Now, I got to tell you the story about water snakes. The marsh was full of water snakes. We had what they called the tool house. It was a small green building, probably take up less than half of this room. It was a tool shed that sat on the side of the railroad tracks near where Sheer Expressions is back then. It sat there, and they actually stored all the tools for the railroad. Well, my dad, when they were getting rid of that building, my dad and my grandfather, and this was before I was born, I think, pretty sure it was before I was born, and my Uncle Jim decided they were going to move that down closer to the water and use that for a shack gang. I don't know if any of you remember the shack gang, but if you look at a picture on the Seaway Bar, you're going to see a whole bunch of people at a table, Natalies and stages and you name them. They're all up there, and that was a shack gang from back in the 30s. They had, here you go with our gang comedy. They had 2 shacks over the railroad tracks down past Winggrass that they had built, and they went down there and had regular meetings, and they had a reunion back in the 50s. I think that picture says 58 or 59. And somewhere there's a ledger with all the names of it. I got to find that, but unfortunately, my sister said she thinks it's over at Mom's house. We haven't come across it yet, but it'd really be a great ledger with all the number of names in it. So they wanted another shack, is where I was going with that tool shed. So they put the tool shed down on the marsh, this side of Ray and Bessie Walrod's property, which is the sewer plant now. And we used to get down there as kids in the tool shed, and they had a great big round oak stove there, and we used to crank that wood stove up get it cherry red. We'd use wood, we'd use coal, we'd use whatever we could use, and we'd spend the night in there and have an absolute riot. We'd invite people down to stay there. Oh gosh, it was fun. But on the other side of that, there was a little dock, not any bigger than this table, went out into the marsh. Didn't have any water around it, so you wouldn't put a boat, but it got us closer to the snakes. So back then, snakes were as big as a table. I mean, you don't have that anymore, but they were massive water snakes. Black ones, brown ones, multicolored, we thought, you know.
You were just smaller.
Yeah, we were smaller. Yeah, we were smaller. Well, I know they're at least 3 feet. Because I caught one time, and I decided, because Snell's Marina, Louis Snell over there on Steele's Point, had a marina, and he had fed me one time alligator and snake. He got them, you know, friends of his sent them up from down south. Had jars of alligator and jars of snake, and they let us eat alligator and snake, so I thought I'd cook a snake. So I caught a water snake and skinned it, cleaned it all up and cooked it, and served it to my cousins. And we got violently sick. We don't know if it was a snake or I didn't know how to cook it. But I ate water snake. I'll never do it again. But the marsh was another great home. We did everything down there. We played hide and go seek. We played capture the flag down on wall rods. We played softball down there in the field. We walked out to the end of the marsh. I love this picture over here. The marsh sometimes was even farther out than that was. But you'd go to the end of the marsh, and you could actually step into the water and walk. Well, I could, because I was 6 foot tall in 7th grade. I could walk to Washington Island. I mean, it was so cool in those days to be able to just get in the water and walk across, and that island became our second retreat. we built lean-tos over there. We had more fun over there as kids, and you know, this was our side of town, the Goose Bay side of town. Smoked. You ever smoked cattail? Cattail and Mars. It's probably why I never smoked cigarettes. We used to light them up and inhale the cattail. Oh, taste it now. It's terrible.
Charlie, the old timers used to talk about they'd swim in that lower bay, but at that time that ship that sunk out there still had its mast.
It had its, I've heard that.
And they raced out, whoever got there first got the best place on the mast, and everybody had to hang under the swimsuit.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard that.
Charlie, who owned Washington Island when you were a kid?
Oh, gosh, you know, I would. Another part about my dad's garage. Everything I had and everything he had was in that garage, that barn, and we kind of neglected it. The roof got nasty one time. The rain kept soaking things up. I tried to patch it up, but I didn't do enough. One day I was away for a week, and Dad had the whole thing bulldozed. Never removed anything from it. I've gone ahead of myself because that was after I came back from the Marine Corps. All my Marine Corps stuff, everything. Just had a 2.5 horse Elgin. Now there's a motor for you. 2.5 horse Elgin. Ran like a champ. And Dad had built, in his day, built a Sharpie. We called it a Sharpie, a flat bottom, red rowboat. He built it in the garage. We put this 2.5 horsepower Elgin on that, and just as kids had an absolute riot. My sisters and I taking that thing around the bay. And I also had a St. Lawrence skiff. Don't know where it came from. This is a mystery. My sister and I remember it. One day it appeared at our house. We thought maybe Uncle Jim brought it over, but we weren't sure. But we had the St. Lawrence skiff for a couple summers. And I was out there with my cousins one day, rowing it to beat the band. We took it everywhere on this river. It was the first time I'd ever been, other than by powerboat, first time I'd ever been on the other side of Grindstone was in that skiff. We rowed it down Picton Channel, rowed over to Canoe Point State Park, rowed around the backside of Picton Island. We had an absolute ride with that. One day I took it out on the bay there, and the sewer pipe used to empty out right off Windgrass, right straight out through past Washington Island. So we're rowing like crazy one day, and I didn't know this pipe would come up out of the sewer pipe. It was probably that high. It was just underwater, and it was somebody had broke it off. It was jagged, and I hit that with that thing going full speed, and ended up being the end of it. Ripped the boards, cracked the hull, cracked some ribs, took on water. We both had to sit in the back end to get it back to shore. Pulled it up, put it in our yard, sat there for a couple weeks. One day I came home, it wasn't there. I asked my dad what happened to the St. Lawrence skiff. He says, doesn't matter. So I happened to ask when I was here for the St. Lawrence skiff show if they had any skiffs that I might look at and see if one of them was mine. He says there's a warehouse up on the East Line Road full of them. So I might take a trip up there, see if I can find a St. It was green and white. Two different color greens, white inside, and 2 rowing arrows. I've still got the oars. That was the one thing, because before the garage got knocked down, I bought this rowboat, and the oars were the kinds that sit on the pintles. So I got this rowboat with pintles, and I was gonna buy a set of oars, and my dad said, well, there's still a set of oars up in the garage, you can get them. I did, I went and got them. I got them at my house, but the garage is gone, and so's that rowboat, somebody stole it. And yet to find, of course, it wouldn't be any good today, that was wooden too. But, geez. So, where was I? Back at, I think I left off at Washington Island. We used to go over to Washington Island all the time. Swim over, paddle over, whatever. We'd go over there and stay there. Built lean-tos, camped overnight. It was a kid's paradise. A lot of people would use the island, but very few people stayed overnight. So we had it all to ourselves staying overnight over there. And, well, I can remember when they were talking, before I went in service, I can remember when they were talking about, they bought the island. Dad and Uncle Jim had a chance to buy that island. I got to backtrack here a little bit. That's where I'm trying to remember as I'm talking who owned it, because the guy offered it to my father and Uncle Jim at one time for $6,000.
Oh, wow.
Okay, $6,000 was more than my father paid for his house. So he says, I'll be damned if I'm gonna buy something that costs more than my house. Dad! Jeez. Anyhow, so they had been offered, but it didn't happen. But I can remember when they bought the property, they bought the island, the investment people that bought it. I got so angry that they were proposing putting houses on it and sectioning the property that I wrote a letter to one of the people that bought it. In the letter I says, I hope 1,000 or something like that seagulls shit in your pool. Every time she came to church, she'd go, Charlie, I still have that letter. So, she never let me forget it. She thought it was hilarious too, but she kept that letter. I don't know if her kids still have it, whether they found it, but she kept that letter. And she says, you know, her husband was the one that when I addressed it to. She says, you know, you gave him one of the biggest smiles of his life when he got that letter. So I said, yeah, I knew it wasn't going to stop progress. But yeah, so there went the island. Now, got to go back to some of the rough and corner side of my family because everybody mentioned stores. Well, we had a store on our side of town, Fink's. Gert and Mike Fink owned the store. Used to go there and get the ice cream. Had tons of, boy, if I had those comic books now. I had comic books that were still in plastic. I mean, they'd be worth something because I was a Marvel fanatic when I was a kid. And those comic books went when my dad bulldozed the garage. I got one of my neighbors there across the street from me. Every time he sees me, he busts on me. Hey, Charlie, where's your comic books? But, so across the town, we went to Mike and Gert Fink's, but across town over there on the end of Reese Street, there was another store that everybody's brought up, and that was Ref's grocery store. And I love history. I couldn't let it go. When that place came up for sale, I bought that place because it was my great uncle and great aunt's store, and I had to have a part of Clayton history, so I live there now. But I can remember going over there as kids, and that's when I met the Brablaws. Oh gosh, there's people on the other side of town just like me. No, are you kidding me? I said I wouldn't mention names, but I will give you that quote. There are people on that side of town that are just like me. That was fun. That was just absolute riot. Was to go over there and sit with my Aunt May in her kitchen, drinking hot chocolate, eating her homemade cooked stuff, and then having somebody ring the doorbell and wanting to be waited on. And I, as a kid, I'd hear Aunt May go, Charlie, would you go in such and such a room and get this for me? And I'd get up from the table and I'd run and get it and bring it out to the store, and she'd sell. They had 2 rooms in the house. One was a cooler, one was just storage. Plus they had the house, the section of the house. I call it, if anybody's familiar with the Moody Blues, House of 4 Doors, because there's 4 doors in that house. And it was divided up, so you either went in the living section, the kitchen section, that's the House of 4 Doors. And I just absolutely loved running around and doing errands with Aunt May and Uncle Charlie. Of course, a lot of you remember Uncle Charlie. He worked for the village of Clayton forever. You know, he was senior citizen on the village of Clayton. But they, of course, my great aunts Florence and Leona, everybody remembers them. They used to ride through town in their Model A. They had it up in Rosier, out on, in fact, that property's still under the rough name, out there by the Ashland Wildlife Area. The only time they would drive it, literally, was to church on Sunday. My aunts would come down and they'd go to church. But my other aunts were nuns at Fairview Manor. So I had that connection with Fairview, and there's another place that I like to go to because I can remember as a kid wandering around in there thinking that was my castle, because the Sisters of St. Joseph had Fairview Manor, and I could go up there anytime I wanted and explore that place. And I remember some of the furniture that was in there was just humongous. I guess they call it Gothic or something, you know, some of the stuff that was in there.
It was the Sisters of the Holy Cross.
Or Sisters of the Holy, yeah, Sisters of the Holy Cross. Thank you. I hit Watertown there on my backside. That's the side of my head facing the wrong way. I went this way. But both my aunts became mother superiors of the home up in their mother house up in Montreal. Faith and Rita Reff, sisters Faith and Rita Reff, which connects me back, to I should have been a priest. Everybody in my family thought I should have been a priest.
Kiss.
No, I don't think so.
You'd probably fill the house.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I feel it.
Hey,
What?
Charlie, tell me again how you're related to the Ruffs.
The refs?
Yeah, Charlie,
My grandmother was Mary Reff,
Okay.
Mamie Reff,
Okay.
Mary Reff, and married Clarence Cornair, was my grandfather's name, and he was the one that was the pilot.
Okay.
And in fact, if you want great-grandparents, yes, I do in the Rosaire Cemetery, if I didn't say that already. I can go back to Clarence's father, or might be his grandfather, 1786, I think is his head. I go up there frequently. I should have written it down before I came down here. 1786 in Rosaire. That isn't bad.
Hey, I hate to butt in. but you
No,
know-
please do.
You know that Rosaire Cemetery has a lot of Clayton residents up there.
Yes.
Why did they go all the way to Rosaire to bury people from Clayton?
Cheaper.
Yeah, it could have been cheaper.
Yeah.
Could have been a lot
Oh,
cheaper.
because the ground
Or
was
they
so
had
tough.
relatives up there.
Yeah, relatives.
Grandfather had a farm up on Burnt Rock Road.
Yeah.
People
Yeah.
lived up there.
Oh, but a lot of people when you're walking through the stones, there's a lot of people that lived in Clayton and got buried there.
Well, that's like that cemetery off the Desengrome
Lots
Road
were
too.
cheaper.
That's another one that's got people. My relatives are buried. Some more of my relatives are buried in that cemetery. But yeah,
We
we
have
got
a
a lot of.
stone wall around it, and there's a nice cemetery there.
Yeah, could be. Well, no, I mean, Rosaire was huge Catholic, and a lot of Catholics, in that area, so, in Clayton area too. So it's other religions, but it was primarily Catholic. And I was a good boy too. I mean, I could tell you all the bad stuff, but I was in the Scouts, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, the fish tank. Everybody's mentioned the fish tank. I actually caught fish and put fish in the fish tank down there. And so I was pretty proud of that as a kid.
Where was the fish?
Yeah,
Fish tank was back down at the end of the street there. Right now it's
In the boat line.
the American Boat Line. It was the American Boat Line building. It's the empty lot in
Oh, they had a fish tank.
that area.
well, I know the Ellis building had a thing that they called the fish
Yeah.
bowl.
Yeah.
Are we talking the same thing or something totally different?
That's different.
That was
Yeah, this was a
That was
tank.
nice.
It literally was a tank. It was a cow tank.
Oh,
Cow tank, and they had a yeah.
You can throw your coins in it.
Yeah, you can toss coins in it and
Yeah.
whatever, and I caught a 4-pound smallmouth and put a 4-pound smallmouth in there one day, and it started eating the rest of the fish. I mean, they had minnows in there. They had to take the 4-pound smallmouth out of it. And I can't leave the railroad without saying that one time I tried to swim to Calumet Island off the coal docks.
Oh my God.
And that's not the right place to start from. Even my daughter knew that when she swam to Calumet Island years later. You should start on that end of Clayton because of the current. So I started out across and ended up down here almost to the end of Hogsback. So the following year we rode all the way up to Bartlett Point. I jumped over and swam and made it to Calumet Island. And then another time we were playing tag. And we started, Barlow's Boathouse was the last boathouse. It was probably right opposite where I'm standing right now, down here at the end. And one of the guys, one of my neighbors, just around the corner from me, always competition in our area. We started out tag, you're it. And that morning, we swam around the entire front of Clayton. Tag, you're it, all the way over. I said Reese Street. He to this day tells me no, it was Mary Street, but that's the obstinance of him. I say Reese Street, and that's the obstinance in me. And when we finally got back across town, everybody had gone home. We don't know who was it. But we used to love to swim down here. We'd jump off the back of the docks when the SS North America or South America was in, and they'd throw coins in the air. And of course, we'd leap for the coins, and sometimes we'd do acrobats. I used to love to do flips, and back flips, front flips, and then they'd throw the coins directly at you. And it was a whole lot easier than trying to get them out of the midair. I bet there's a lot of coins. When I became a diver later on, I actually found some down there. But I wished I'd kept them. They'd probably be more valuable because of the years. And yeah, diving. Okay. Back in '66, they started a dive club down here. End of my street was one of the big family down there, and their father was I think he dove with Jacques Cousteau. This guy, he was so awesome. Listening to him tell stories. But, I mean, he went back to the days when they had the double aqualung and everything, you know. And he and the neighbor down the street from me, and another neighbor next to me, they started this, along with Snell's, and they started this dive club. Well, they tried to get me in it for a couple of years. I finally broke down and joined it. And I wish I had never stayed away from it, because I got into the dive club. In fact, I still have somewhere around my house, I thought I'd find that, and I can't find it. Still have one of my cards, my membership cards. It's number 28 from one of the years that I belonged to it. And I got to tell you how they taught me how to dive, because that's, again, goes down with the swimming. They took me down Picton Island Channel one day. At the end of this end of Picton Island Channel, they dropped the anchor and they said, "Okay, Charlie, if you can go down to the bottom and bring something up to prove you were there, you can go in the dive club." I went, okay. I dove over the side of the boat, I went down to the bottom, I grabbed a handful of muck, and I had a clamshell, and I came back to the top, and I said, "There you go." And they all went, they were joking. I didn't realize they were joking. The water also was 45 feet deep. So I proved to them I could be a member of the dive club, and that winter I saved up all the money I earned off the golf course, which, by the way, my Uncle Carl and Aunt Margaret Bertrand owned the golf course here at the time. And I never played golf. My dad always did. But he used to play golf free everywhere. The Natales were big members of I told you, the Shack Gang from years ago. So the Natale family was all in that. And in fact, they were my dad's pallbearers. My dad, here's another thing. I go all around in circles here. Pardon me, people. I only got about 5 minutes left. Actually, I probably got 5 hours if I really. But my dad and the Natales and the Pacifics and everybody was in that Shack Gang, and they were big influencers on me, very big influencers. And I said to Becky when she left, I'm free to talk about the Pacific family, but I can't, because I think statute of limitations are expired, but I wouldn't want anybody to know. Becky says, I'll go ahead. Fa was one of the ones that you see the picture going off the coal chute. I heard that story most of my life when I was younger, because Fa used to come over and play cards at our house. So when I was a kid, grew up a little bit more, I went up that coal chute, getting chased by the people that told you weren't supposed to be there, and jumped off. I didn't dive off, but I jumped off. Which reminds me of another time. One time at night, we smuggled our bicycles on top of one of these buildings over here. I won't tell you which one. But we got the bikes up on top of the building during the night, because we knew if we saw they did it during the daytime, they wouldn't let us. And then in the daytime, we actually got up to the top of the building and rode our bikes off the building into the river. And got yelled at by the cops.
Close enough to the river? You
Oh, we had to pedal like crazy.
Yeah.
But if you see some of the pictures, there's one particular building, I won't tell you which one it was, whose roof goes down, slants just enough, and the dock was probably only from here to those chairs, or the water.
Yeah.
And so if you got going, you landed out back there where Bob is. You really did. You pedaled like crazy, because you had look how long these buildings are. But yeah, we rode our bikes off the top of the building into the water. And somebody had mentioned about Old Home Week in Clayton, how they used to have the contest down here at the village docks. Oh, across here, I'm sorry. You used to have to get a watermelon out of the water. I don't know if you remember them. You used to try to trap a watermelon and bring a watermelon up. They had a grease pole contest. You had to go out and get the flag off the end of the grease pole. And they had a dive tank. Great big dive tank. It's still up at Skip Couch's property up on the East Line Road. enormous dive tank, great big glass window in front of it. I got in the dive tank and I showed people you could drink a bottle of soda underwater. And eat grapes and peel bananas and eat bananas. They used to do that during an old home week. Yep. And they had destroyers. I don't know if you remember all the Navy ships used to come in. This used to be a big stop for them. We get to do the tour of the ships. Well, one of them came in one time during old home week, and a friend of mine and I talked our way onto the boat, got up to the bridge, and we were able to dive off the bridge of the boat during old home week, right into the village dock. That was pretty cool. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Remember when they brought the landing ship in front of the Legion?
Yes.
They had a hard time getting it in, and they kept having to go back and forward, and the bottles kept coming up from old bottles. Everybody's trying to get these old bottles.
Oh, I'll tell you, I do have a few bottles of teardrops, round bottoms, a few bottles from, actually, but they came from down here, and some of them from farther up. We used to do ice dive for demonstration out in front of McCormick's. I don't know if you remember that. We'd cut a great big triangle in the ice, and we'd go out there and do ice dive under the ice. When in the wintertime then, and that was another beauty of being a diver. I went from the time when this river was so full of sewage that you couldn't see that far in front of you, diving, to where it cleared up with these zebra mussels, and diving out there now, my gosh, you can see from here to Calumet Island. I hate to say we imported something that did us a favor, but now the ducks and fish are eating them, so I guess that's a good thing too.
Actually, it's gone too far, and we've gone to some areas that are kind of sterile.
Yes,
And we end
yes,
up with
I
dead
was,
zones now.
yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, we have. Being an environmentalist, I absolutely agree with you on that.
I got a question for you. So you said you jumped off this destroyer. Why didn't you join the Navy? And you joined the Marine Corps. How did you come about joining the Marine Corps?
Well, you see, being a student of history now, in the Revolutionary War, when we were going to take over America, from the British, the first thing that the U.S. did was make an army. Okay? So the Army had the birthdays in June, I believe it is, 14th of June, 1775. They made the Army. That October, they made the Navy. And then the Army for the ground battles, obviously, the Navy to support the Army on the ground, plus to go out and get the ships, you know. Well, neither one of them were effective enough, so they brought the Marine Corps out in November. Because the Army and the Navy, they started with two and they didn't work. They had to have somebody to pick it up. I joined the Marine Corps. Huh? Is that all right?
That's all right.
Yeah, that's just the other end of my story. Joining the Marine Corps. That's where it's going to stop. So maybe I ought to start wrapping it up. I could talk, like I said, for another 3 hours. I haven't touched on half of what I wanted to.
So what was your job in the military?
I wasn't going to talk about that because I'll fast forward here. You know, but I did everything I could possibly do in the village of Clayton because it was my home. Let's put it that way. And the adventuresome spirit that has always been in me was helped out by everybody that lived in this village, because some people let me get away with things I probably shouldn't have gotten away with. Some people, I have probably it's unique to me. When the old jail was up here in the fire hall there, I actually got locked up in there. My uncle locked me up to try to teach me a lesson. But by the same token, the old jail that used to be down in Alex Bay, I got locked up in there, but it was for a reason. So I may be the only one in Clayton who's been locked up in both old jails. I don't know. If somebody else has, come see me, because I want to join the club. But you know, growing up then, the transformation, this is where I was going to. Everybody remembers the regal tones and everybody remembers the music, and the most stark thing that I remember about the music and the regal tones and the fact that they, of course, eventually became Blue Oyster Cult, some of them did, was one of their last performances was in the park on the tennis courts up there by St. Mary's. St. Mary's is another thing I was going to tell you about. We'll not go there. That particular night that they performed, Dave and I were, said I wouldn't mention names, but you know the two of the boys that we lost here in Vietnam, their brothers were very good friends of mine. And we were up there in the park, and as a matter of fact, they were too. It was their last time here in Clayton, because later that fall, I believe it was, we were sitting in class, and they came in and made the announcement, we want to talk to you. Escorted one out, and a day or two later, they escorted another out. And it ended up being, we lost two of our best in Vietnam. But I decided I wanted to go see what it was all about. So I wasn't going to take it just on what I saw on TV, so I did too. And that was where my military service started, was at the end of my school year. I had delayed enlistment. The following October, I was in the Marine Corps. 6 months later, a little more, I was overseas, and then I came back and the entire village of Clayton changed.
Were you in a technical field or a combat field?
I saw combat.
Okay.
But that's where I was going to end it only because, like I say, I had a great youth. Grew up here, went to service, grew up there, came back. Clayton had changed. That's the next half of my story. If you ever want to do another 150 years of Clayton, the differences between my leaving in 1969 and coming back in 1973 are phenomenal. The bridge was across to Grindstone by then, or Washington. I'm sorry, Grindstone. That was.
I was gonna say, I mean, did it literally change, or did you change?
I don't know.
You know,
I don't know.
Little bit of both.
both.
So, yeah.
I don't know.
When you talk about the regal tone playing in there, do you remember the block dances they used to have in the late '60s there, or right down, downtown was the foot of John Street? Where was that? Where it kind of, they kind of cordoned off the block, and they had music and people dancing and
Yep.
block dances. That was pretty neat.
Yeah, we had a ball.
Hey Charlie, did you go to St. Mary's School?
Yep. Yeah, I went to St. Mary's. Oh gosh.
How did you and the
Yep.
nuns get along?
Well, I knew what the razor strap and a yardstick and everything else was. I wore a bandage today. No.
Still got the scars.
But I was an altar server. I was. They recruited me and a couple other guys as the youngest altar servers, and I served on the altar right straight through my senior year, and I actually got to serve on the altar twice when I was in Vietnam. And I always talk about that. I love to say that because I may not appear on the surface. I have a lot of faith. And my first job, other than collecting golf balls and selling them on the golf course and selling them to my aunt and uncle in the clubhouse, that was a job. I also was a janitor at the church and St. Mary's High School, and I got to make odd money doing that, and then became a janitor at the high school. As soon as I got to the high school, they hired me, but that was my neighbors. Yeah, I always say you got to have connections. I had neighbors that had connections, and my mother, of course, worked in the cafeteria. She was one of the cooks there, and so I had a job when I was a kid. I thought my career was going to be a janitor, but it didn't end up that way.
Charlie, what got you started with the ice and the trucks, leaving the truck out on the ice?
Yeah. I wasn't even going to go there. As I said, I only wanted to go there. I was going to cut it off at high school.
Somebody bet you, didn't they?
Well, remember I told you I started diving back in the 60s, in 67, 66, 67. And my first trip down was in Picton Island Channel. There's a pickup truck down there, believe it or not. At the bottom, right this side of Russell Bay, there's a pickup truck. And I always said, I wondered how that got there. So years later, I found out. You drive out on the ice isn't safe, you sink it.
Well, a lot of people on Grindstone, when they got too many cars, before spring, they drag a whole bunch of cars out of the river, and they would all disappear.
Yeah. You could go down this one here, and I haven't been on it ages, but you can go down inside this, you can get right in there, and you can sit right behind the wheel. It was so cool. You could just sit, and there was like canvas, you know, and it would just sit there and back then it would just sit there and move in the current. You'd be sitting inside there, and it actually you felt like it was motion. It was kind of cool. No, the green can story, a lot of people think that I was stupid. Well, I went around it twice, so maybe the second time I was stupid. But I went around it the first time. Now my mother had fished with me. Now, I say you want me to get out of here, I know. My mother had been out fishing with us, and my sister, and my dogs. And Mom wanted to come back in. She was getting cold, so we brought my mom back in. And my sister was going to go with my mother back home, and my mom said, no, you don't need to do it. And I said to my sister, come on, get in the car. We're going to go around the green can. We are? I said, yeah. You think it's safe? Of course it is. So we'd been out there. We'd already walked out there. The whole gang of us were out there. We were bouncing up and down on the green can. I stuck my arm in the water. I had ice that thick. 20 inches of ice, at least.
Where's the green can?
That's what we call it, the green can. The buoys aren't in yet. The green can that's sitting out there marks where that buoy goes in. Well, that's what was in all winter, was the green can. That's why it's, so we had that much ice. I said, yeah, it's safe. We can go around that. There's 20 inches of ice there. So we went around it, and the griffin is coming down river. And the griffin's yelling, you know, get off the ice. The ice is dangerous. Get off the ice. The ice is dangerous. Well, we were just out here. We know it's not dangerous. And I came back in, and my sister said, oh, I'm going to go home and check on Mom. I said, you sure you don't want to go back out? No. So I go back out, and I had the camera, and I wanted to take pictures. So the griffin had gone by now. And I said to other people that are out there ice fishing, I said, does anybody want to take a trip around the green buoy? Go one more time around the green buoy, get some pictures. Nope. And a friend of mine does say, yeah, I'll go with you. He gets up, and as he's getting up, he gets a bite. No, wait a minute, I want to catch a fish. I says, no, I want to go right now. So I went around. I was doing fine, but I stopped the car, picked the camera up. When I stopped the car, the ice went crack. And I went, oops. So I knew I wasn't going to get out of this situation. Always have the window down when you're driving on the ice. I dove out the window. When I dove out the window, my black lab came out after me. Then the ice gave way completely. And the car settled in. The cake of ice went down. I'm sinking on the cake of ice. I'm trying to grab my other dog out of the car. It's a big chocolate lab. He finally comes out. When he does, he pushes me underwater. So I'm going under, and the only first thing I do is reach my hands up, grab it for something. I did happen to catch the window of the car. I'm coming back up, but I'm yelling to my golden retriever, who's still sitting in the back seat. She isn't moving, so I got to get the hell out of the water. I'm rolling for the water. Now everybody's running out to us. One of the guys has an immersion suit, had bought an immersion suit for ice fishing, impervious to the cold. He grabs a big plank out of another guy's truck that wasn't parked that far away, brings the plank out, slides it out to my car as the car's starting to sink, grabs the golden retriever, and just as he pulls her out of the car, he gets back on the board, rolls her up on the ice, and the car goes bob. Didn't even bob twice, just went once, went to the bottom. So, we lost the car. A green neon around the green can. They used to be my neighbor. He runs up to him. He says, come on, get in the truck. Get in the truck. Hurry up. You're going to freeze. And it was about 10 degrees. And I was already icing up. I only had Carhartts on. He says, I'll get you home. He runs me home. Runs up on the sidewalk in front of my house. Hits my fence. Breaks my fence. Leaves the truck running. Throws the door open. Runs inside. My wife's sitting in there with a couple of her girlfriends, and he goes, you know what that dumb-arse husband of yours did? She goes, no. And he says, he sunk your car. First words out of my wife's mouth were, are the dogs all right? She didn't care about me. Didn't have any beer bottles, but my son's homework was actually in the trunk of the car. He did have a legitimate excuse to screw it.
I didn't need it.
His homework was in the trunk of the car. So, I've taken up all your time. I still
Yeah.
got 3 pages to go, sorry.
Well, we can invite you back, and I'd love to have hear more. It's getting closer to that lunch hour. People have commitments, but your first name's Charles, right?
Yes, it is.
Charles, Charlie,
That
Steve.
sounds excellent.
All right.
Shake your
You
hand.
can. All right. Thank you. And I want to get a picture of you by the banner.
All right.
But again, thank everyone for coming. It's been a little bit longer day, but I appreciate you being here and enjoying our Hatching Over History lecture series. Thank you again.
Thanks, Charlie.